Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on algae farming and the latest developments and I guess real opportunities for regional Queensland. These are very strange and not so wonderful times, so it's great that we can present a webinar that I truly believe you'll find both fascinating and inspiring. So I'm Nicole Price from the Clean Growth Choices Consortium, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. So this webinar is actually the first in a second webinar series that we'll be presenting as part of the Queensland Communities in Transition program. And for those of you who are not familiar with the program, it's funded by the Queensland government and it's been running now for about 18 months. And it involves 6 regional communities that you can see on the slide here. And those communities have been exploring what the future might hold for them, and then developing a roadmap that will help them transition to a more economic and equitable and environmentally sustainable future. And those roadmaps are actually now available on the Clean Growth Choices website. So the Clean Growth Choices Consortium has been working alongside each of these communities to assist them in this process. And as you can see down the bottom there, it's made up of the University of Southern Queensland, James Cook University, CSIRO, and the Eco-Efficiency Group. So if you are interested in finding out more about the program and the journey so far for each of these communities, I really encourage you to get on the Clean Growth Choices website. That website actually also houses previous recordings of webinars and also information about upcoming webinars. So today, as you'll hear, algae farms really offer an exciting opportunity for regional and rural Queensland in terms of producing biofuels as well as protein for human and livestock consumption and pharmaceuticals. First of all, we're going to hear from Professor Peer Shenck, who leads the Algae Biotechnology Lab that's based at the University of Queensland. We're actually feeling really fortunate that Pierre's taken out his time today to share his, well, internationally recognised expertise in cost-effective algae cultivation and harvesting. We're also very honoured to have Kai Chen, who is an agricultural scientist and he's also the operations manager at AgaePharm. So Kai was actually part of Pierre's lab research team and has now moved on to develop and operate a microalgae cultivation and processing facility at Goondiwindi, and it's actually the first of its kind. So it's with great pleasure that I now hand over to Pierre, who's going to be presenting for around 20 minutes. He's got a stack of information to get through, and Kai, who'll follow on from Pierre and talk for another 20 minutes. So we might actually leave the questions till after both Pierre and Kai have spoken. If you want to ask a question, please just fill out the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we'll devote about 10 or 15 minutes at the end to answering those questions. So just bear with us while going there, Pierre.
Okay, my turn. Great.
Yep.
So I'm Peer Shenck. So yeah, I'm fortunate that I can have the opportunity to talk to you about algae, which is my favorite topic. And I'm going to share my screen with you. So I'm just working from home in the moment, obviously, but I see that there's also a chat with the Zoom. So Penny, or Nicole, did you want people to use that at all or not? Because I don't mind if people put questions there and I can get back to them as well. So I think you're on mute.
Sorry, whatever's easiest for the listeners. Okay. And I should actually just mention Kai's tuning in from Goondiwindi, and his reception's a bit unpredictable. So hopefully we can work through all the technology problems.
Okay. Anyway, I'm happy for people to use the chat function, and I will keep an eye on it as I speak as well, and then we can have a look. So just see if this works now. Just a moment. Yep. So I'm gonna bring up my presentation. Okay. although you guys can see the chat thing as well. Let's see, I put it here. So yes, basically I will talk about opportunities for Queensland. So latest developments and real opportunities for Queensland. So I'm at the School of Agriculture and Food Sciences at UQ, also affiliated with the Queensland Alliance for Agriculture and Food Innovation, QAFI. And there's my email and also our website, schencklab.com. We work not just on fundamental research, but also very applied research. And one of the topics we're working on is algae. Just below, you see some of those companies that we're working on or that formed out of the research and that are now developing algae farms in Queensland. So one of them is AgaePharm, and Kai will talk about this particular example. So if you look at microalgae, so algae, normally you think of them, they're just slime or something, not maybe that interesting, but it turns out that they can grow really, really fast. They have 10 to 20 times higher area productivity than soybean, for example, than other crops, and about 70 times more protein production per hectare than soybean. So imagine you can grow a lot more protein with algae because they double or sometimes triple in just one day. So imagine a plant, let's say that's 1 meter tall, and you come back the next day and it's 2 meters tall. So that's how fast the algae can grow. So it's quite nice to see that. So, and they also, what's very attractive about them is that they don't depend on arable land. So we can really use land that has not been used before for anything else. And also we don't need to compete for biodiverse landscapes. So non-arable land, not necessarily a biodiverse landscape need to be used here. And this is very different to most other crops that do require arable land. The other really good thing about algae is that we can use any type of water. So that means really any type of water. So even brackish water, seawater, and even wastewater can be used to grow algae. It does limit a little bit what the algae can be used for later, but that's basically the idea. And we can also, with the climate that we have in Queensland, we are fortunate that we can harvest the algae almost the whole year. So it's a kind of sustainable production of food, feed, and fuel with the algae. So basically the 3 F's, food, feed, and fuel. And if you look at that, they are the 3 biggest commodities that we all depend on, directly touching on food security and energy security. So because it's a new industry, we can still learn a lot, and the learning curve can lead to lower costs of production. So in summary, algae just need sunshine, some type of flat land, and some type of water. So if we look at, we've done some modeling where this can be done, where can we grow the algae? And one of the, if you look at just where can we grow them without competing for arable land or biodiverse landscapes like rainforests, we see that a lot of the areas close to the ocean are suitable because they have salt water or seawater, and they also have the sunshine. And then in Australia, though, if you don't want to compete with arable land, you can go a little bit further west. And the coastal areas are not really that suitable because there's already a lot of population and there's fertile land there. But in Queensland, you can see that the area a little bit further west, just around Gondiwindi and maybe a little bit further west of Gondiwindi, is where there's still some water available and there's also plenty of land available. So the team consists of different disciplines. We have biologists, we have people who work on genetics, on plant breeding, in this case for algae. We have people who are biochemists, nutritional food chemists. We have people who are interested in larger scale production. So these are more engineers, and people who are interested in commercialization and even marketing, things like that. So if you look at the process, basically you isolate some algae initially from some extreme environments such as rock pools, because rock pools get a lot of sunshine and they become very hot and can run out of water, but the algae are able to survive. And that gives them the ability to accumulate large amounts of oil in their cells. So when algae run out of nutrients, they stop dividing and become really, really fat. And that's because they can still do photosynthesis, and the product of photosynthesis is sugar. And of course, we all know what happens when we eat too much sugar. So the same thing happens to algae. They become really fat and they accumulate very large amounts of lipids in their cells. And this is what we want because we can use those lipids for a number of purposes. For example, in an algae biorefinery, we can use the oil for biofuel production, but we can also use oil from a different species, which is a high value oil, for example, for omega-3 fatty acid production. And the remaining biomass is also very interesting because it's high in protein. And so this is good for human nutrition, but also very good for animal feed. So one of the first things we've done, we've been working on this for 16 years, is basically selecting a high lipid, high oil producing algae strain. And you can see this particular one. I quite like it. If you look at it, it's got a red eye spot. And basically, if you look in the microscope, it looks back at you. And so you can develop some type of relationship with the algae. And then in return, the algae will produce a lot of oil in their cells. And you can see this here with the red staining. We also needed to look at how we can grow these at larger scale. So we look at a pond shape. So the pond shape needs to be adapted so that we have a low amount of energy as we circulate the pond. We also find that as we add CO2 to the algae, they can grow 3 times faster. So then the question is, how can you supply the CO2 and where does it come from? Does it come from another industry, for example? Basically, the addition of CO2 makes the algae grow much faster. And so another step was to get all the cells to produce oil all at the same time so that we can harvest them and get a huge amount of oil from them. So another question was then, how can we extract the oil? How can we get it out of the cells? So this is not super easy. It depends on normally how you do it, but first you have to dry the algae, then normally use an organic solvent, and then you can extract the oil. However, we've used just ethanol at this point because ethanol is much more environmentally friendly and safer than hexane, which is the traditional way of extracting the oil. So we're very keen then to see whether we can apply things at large scale. So we realized that it's not enough just talking about a project, publishing papers, but if you want to be taken seriously by the industry, you have to show that this can be done at large scale and that it's an economical process. So it's good to grow algae for food, feed, and fuel, but if you really want to have an impact, we need to establish the industry. So this is kind of a first step in doing this. So it's a pilot plant that we developed in Pinjarra Hills, which is at the Brisbane River. It's kind of a rural setting, although it's close to Brisbane City. And so this area has no roads, no electricity supply, no fresh water supply from no town water. So this is exactly the kind of challenge we were looking for. So in this area, we can access the river water, which is brackish, and we can access the sun, obviously. So we can produce a little bit of electricity if we need to with solar panels. But basically, the idea is just to produce algae from sun and water. So if you look on Google Earth or on Google Maps, you can see the AgaePharm at Pinjarra Hills. Just here is the Brisbane River. It's brackish depending on the tide. And so we can access the water and electricity. A small amount of electricity is produced with using some solar panels. So here you can see the process. Initially, you have a starter culture that comes from the lab. So these are tiny microscopic cells. You can only see them in the microscope. This culture would then be used to grow maybe 10 liters. 20 liters is the most we can grow in the lab. Those 20 liters are then taken onto the farm and serve as the inoculum for the next culture, which is going to be 200 liters. So you can always inoculate a culture with 10% of the volume. So 20 liters inoculate 200 liters. If we take 200 liter bags, which are these bags here, we can inoculate a 4,000 liter pond. It's 400 liter of culture. And then we can take this 4,000 liter pond and we can inoculate a 40,000 liter pond, which would be larger. So you see every time it's getting a step larger. And what you'll see from Kai is the largest one that we have in Australia, even much larger than this. And so we have a few of those mid-sized raceway ponds. This just gives you some idea how big they are. And they are very productive. We can produce around 70 tons per hectare per year using these algae. So harvesting is done by settling or by filtration, depends on the process. And then solar drying is one of the options how we can dry the algae. So what's interesting about the algae is then that we have a zero waste concept. So that means everything from the algae is used for one purpose or for several purposes. So in this case, we use an algae which is called Nanochloropsis. It's a marine algae that comes from the Sunshine Coast. And this particular algae is very high in omega-3 fatty acids, EPA in particular. You may know that omega-3 is in fish oil, and but the fish is not sustainably sourced. So we're looking at a vegan source of omega-3, which can be provided by the Nanochloropsis algae, which are the original source of the omega-3 in the food chain. The fish themselves don't produce omega-3. They take it from smaller fish, they eventually take it from the algae. So the idea here is to produce omega-3 fatty acids on land without relying on fish. And so this is also a very good supplementation to another omega-3 that's used from another algae, DHA, which is often used for infant formula. And omega-3 fatty acids have proven benefits to prevent cardiovascular diseases. They're also anti-inflammation, even antidepressant. So they're very good health compounds, and we all have a shortage of these kind of omega-3 fatty acids. So the oil can be extracted, which is about 30% of the biomass. So that provides a black oil, which has also still chlorophyll in it. And then the remaining biomass is kind of a beige powder. Now this is very high in protein, and it's also very interesting for human nutrition or for animal feed because of the protein. The protein is special from Nanochloropsis because it has all essential amino acids. This means you don't rely on meat or any other sources. This kind of protein should be enabling you to get all the amino acids that you need. Of course, it's also a vegan product, so there's a big and emerging market for vegan protein these days. You know, you have heard of the Impossible Burger, I guess, and you know, vegan meat, that sort of thing. So there's quite a lot of interest now in this byproduct, if you like, from the oil extraction, which is very high in protein, and also it is hypoallergenic, which means there's no known allergies for this protein, against this protein. So if you look at the values, so the economic reality is very important, of course. Question was, can we produce this to a point where it is cheap enough? So the same oil could be produced for biofuel, right? So if you just look at the market proposition, I think we can look at the kind of value here from the market. If we produce omega-3 rich oil, it's between $100 and $150 a liter. If we produce biodiesel for fuel, we would get about $1 a liter. If we produce feed from algae, we are competing against something like soybean meal, which is about 50 cents a kilogram. If we're looking at high value protein for human consumption, it's more like $20 a kilogram. So if you're a business person, you would basically look at getting the most out of your algae, and that would be producing omega-3 rich oil and producing high value protein for human consumption, both at the same time. So in the case of Gondiwindi, I think they do at least one of these things, but possibly both of them. But the master plan is still to make the algae production so cheap that we can also produce biofuel. So for example, a combination of biodiesel production is possible if we also produce high value protein. I hope that makes sense. So, all right, so these are the costs. The highest cost is CO2, the addition of CO2. So if we are able to get a free source of CO2, that would significantly reduce the cost. In fact, it would halve it. This was the case about omega-3 fatty acids for microalgae. You can see the global fish stocks are declining. We're down to about 10% of the original fish stocks that we had 50 years ago. So this is a crazy situation. It's not sustainable, and there's simply not enough fish to provide the omega-3 demand, which is about a $30 billion industry to the world. So if you look at the different algae, there's some that are very, very high in EPA, which is one of those omega-3 fatty acids. Nanochloropsis can have more than 50% of its fatty acids as EPA. So therefore, it's a very interesting algae. Microalgae are also very good for antioxidant producers. I won't go into too much detail, but basically very healthy. They're also healthy for production of phytosterols, which lower cholesterol. So altogether, you can have a very good package, not just one compound, but several health compounds from microalgae. However, microalgae themselves, if you just look at the powder, it's not very palatable. It's not very tasty directly, the powder. It's dry. And so the idea would be, how can we market this? How can we put it into a form that it's appreciated by people? So we can add it to food. So this is one of the options. For example, here we made some algae bread. It's a fortification of bread. So then it turns green. And then you get mixed reactions from people. A lot of people like the taste. Some people said it looked moldy, so they didn't like the green color. But it was going quite well with especially savory food, for example, with cheese. Also pasta. So pasta has been made. Different colors of pasta, depending on which algae you can add. You can have all these natural colors from different algae, and you can have different colors. Here's another pasta that we made with Nanochroopsis. This is a company has algae that has formed out of this work, and it's based in Hong Kong, looking at algae as a food ingredient. The same company also looked at producing these golden nugget biscuits. And basically, there's no limitation. You know, I think we should probably talk to a master chef and make a competition what they can produce out of algae and see what they come up with. But basically, there's already many ideas. For example, those protein balls, you just need 3 of them to cover your omega-3 recommended daily intake. Or many types of Japanese food as well. You know, so many different options. This is something I wanted to show you. It's called algae caviar. So basically, these are little round bead, and you can see how we make them here. All we do is just put the algae suspension into alginate capsules, and therefore we make them look much more attractive. So that's how they look here. And then so another algae company formed called Ocean Orchards at the Sunshine Coast, and they are just specializing on packaging the algae into the algae caviar, and therefore make them look very attractive, and it becomes a very nice side dish. Also, algae produce the world's strongest antioxidant, which is astaxanthin. So this one is produced by an algae called Haematococcus. It's a nice red algae. And one of my students, she's very proactive in this area, developing all sorts of products, for example, a face mask, lip balm, all these kind of things. She calls herself microalgae mama. So very interesting development that we can put algae onto cosmetic products as well. So what about where can we grow large farms in Australia? So initially when we looked at the map, we looked at, okay, the Middle East is a fantastic place to grow them. So here we built a commercial farm in the desert. So this is in Oman. And the principle was to show that we can get algae to grow at high temperatures without requiring fresh water in the desert. And so this was working. This was together with the Japanese construction engineering company. Then we started expanding a little bit around our algae farm in Pinjarra Hills. And you can see we now have more solar panels, and we have larger ponds to basically show that these things can be done in even larger scale. So the 40,000 liter pond now serves as inoculum for this pond, which is much larger, but still small compared to what in Gondiwindi has happened. And you can see it here, one of those ponds. Okay. So yes, harvesting is a lot of fun. There's another algae farm that we have helped build in Miles. Also, it's in Queensland, a bit further north of Gondiwindi, and they are called Ocean Pure Australia. They're producing also a cosmetic product and a drink from algae. And so then, of course, Kai will talk about the algae farm with pH in Gondiwindi, and these are just some photos from the construction, but you can see it's spot on in the Goldilocks zone where you should be growing algae. It's part of the photos there, but I don't want to take the steam away from Kai's presentation. So he will, this is going to be him very soon. Okay, So something else we tried, because as we try to do decarbonization, we try to grow algae just with CO2 from a power plant, and that was successful. This is growing algae with CO2 from a coal-fired power plant. It was a bit challenging, but we were able to do that. But the new idea now is to grow fuel from algae, fuel and protein basically. So an algae energy farm will look at recycling the nutrients as well. So basically, we like to look at it as a solar power plant that produces oil rather than electricity. So just the concept here. So, and basically you have a pond, you add the nutrients to the ponds, the algae grow, you can harvest the algae, you can do extraction of the oil, which then can be converted into biodiesel. The remaining biomass, which is about 70%, that's where all the nutrients are, right? Because the moment you remove biodiesel, you're only removing carbon from the system, but you're not removing the nutrients. So that can be added into an anaerobic digester. In here, biogas is produced. The biogas, when combusted, can be converted to electricity, but there's also CO2 that's being emitted from that. And the CO2 can be used to grow more algae, and also the nutrients from the digestate of the anaerobic digester can be used to grow more algae. So we are effectively recycling the nutrient in a closed system. The inputs are simply the sun and CO2 from the air, and the outputs are biogas, electricity, and biodiesel. So this is something that we have in mind together with another industry, and that's a piggery in Gatton. But we are very open to any suggestions that anyone might have, how we can combine this with other industries that may have CO2 or some nutrients that they would like to utilize. And so it's very easy to link it with other industries, and we can produce fuel, which I think in the current climate is a good idea, because Australia only has about 30 days worth of fuel supply without the imports. So we're very dependent on fuel still. So yes, so please be part of this. If you have any ideas or suggestions, or just like to collaborate, please contact us. You can have a look at the website as well, shenck.com. And I'm just going to have a look whether there's been any parts in the chat, any questions from the chat. Let me just see, is that possible? Okay, I stopped my sharing.
Thanks very much, Peer. That's a really excellent overall summary, and great to see so much activity in Queensland. We'll get straight on to you, Kai. You want to share your screen, and we'll hear more from Gundawindi.
Thanks, David. David made a good comment.
Hi guys, so my name is Kai, the agriculture scientist and the operational managers at AgaePharm in Gundawindi here. Being the first employee in the company, I've been working on this project for a bit over more than a year now. So after fine-tuning the whole production and processing system for the last couple of months, we are about to get into a pretty exciting new season of harvesting pretty soon. So I just want to start off the presentation with a picture that I took in Pinjai Hill, UQ Pinjai Hill Farm in Brisbane back in 2018. As you can see from Pierre's presentation, the facility has already gone through an upgrade last year with bigger pond and better equipment. But basically the facility is just to use as a demonstration site of large-scale microalgae cultivation. Also use it to test new technology and we develop in the lab, as well as supplied a bit of algae biomass for the lab research purpose. I did my own research on a large-scale microalgae cultivation under the supervision with Pierre and Dr. Sky Thomas Hall in this place. Spent a year working in here, cultivating a lot of different marine and freshwater algae species. After graduating from uni in 2018, I was lucky to get to use my experience and knowledge to develop and operate a larger facility in Gundawindi. Building the algae facility in Gundawindi is kind of like building a scaled-out version of what it is in Pinjai Hill. But then as we are chasing efficient and consistent production in Gundawindi, there's a lot more challenge came alongside as well. In all the presentation, I try to share a bit of my experience in developing a facility in Gundawindi, and we will start with how the idea got started. So the AgaePharm is part of Food Group's project, and as an attempt to diversify their operation, they want to introduce more innovative technology into the business. So as it turned out, growing and processing algae with the right technology, we can kind of achieve the high quality omega-3 and protein in a sustainable way without doing any damage to the environment. So both of the nutrients will be of interest for animal and human consumption. This fit just right in Wood Group's operation, as they already have established the stock feed and human food divisions. So they started trialing and designing the new facility with UQ, and the development permission got granted in 2018. Company that we have is called AgaePharm, a pretty interesting name that we changed that with the F to PH. We took that PH from pharmaceutical. It kind of like emphasizing that we're not going to be a conventional farming practice. So we are located on Bowen Highway. As you can see, oh, where's my mouse? There you go. 67 Bowen Highway, just right on the edges of the Gundawindi town. It sits alongside with other Wood Group's facility. The next door here we follow silo, that's Wood's grain facility, and that's all the bunkers. Across the bunker, it's not shown in the picture here, but then that's the Wood Stockfeed facility there as well. Then near the border, that's the Wood's human food division called Human Beans. So that's having other Wood Group facility as neighbor means that we're able to share a lot of resource and potential. However, being so close to the residential area, just one street away here, we did get some criticized when the news about the development of the farm was out. Mainly was people concerning about the smells, mosquitoes, and the noise. That's pretty much just due to people's misconception with the word algae. When they think about algae, people think about something green, slimy, and smelly stuff in the stagnant water. The why those also considered as part of the family of the algae is just completely different from what we're doing growing in the algae farm. We are growing microalgae in the pond with constant water movement, and especially with the species that we're growing here in the algae farm. It's a marine water species, and we have never have any problem with the smells and mosquito. And the cultivation and processing system that we design produce pretty much no noise. We actually get contracted work for us and for that we are not in operation because they didn't hear anything, the usual noise that we expect from the processing plant. Other than putting effort into design a low noise production system, we also kind of pay extra attention on minimizing the impact throughout the operations. So we don't have any complaints since the day we started the facility. After settling on the location, we kind of work on what kind of algae we want to grow. So when it comes to choose the right algae for our facility, it's going to be a lot of things to need to be taken into considerations. The first thing is make sure that we're going to have an algae species that will survive and handle the local temperature climate well. Just like any other plant, different algae have different ideal temperature range of growth. And the Gundawindi temperature can go up to 40-ish degrees in summer and down to 0 degrees in winter. On our side here, throughout the year, we most likely stay in range in 25 to 35 Celsius most of the time. If the algae is doing well in this temperature range, we'll not only get more U, but we're also lowering the risk of other species contaminating the pond because the algae is growing so well, so strong, it will take off all the nutrients in the first place and then just outcompete other species. So after that, we'll also look into the nutrient content that algae provide. After all, this is probably the main reason that we develop a product. The nano crops that we chosen have like really good fatty acid profile, very high EPA content, as you guys see in Peer's slides, and then also very good amino acid profile when you compare it to other algae. So both of the nutrients have several applications in animals and human consumptions. Hence, that's why it become the ideal candidates. After finding the right species, we also work on selecting the right strain. You could collect a lot of different strains of microalgae. Some of them just straight from isolating from the oceans. Under the same species, they have different strains, and different strains will have different kind of characteristic in. And this is a trial and error process to make sure that we have the best strain of nano available in our pond. A good strain will provide good nutrient content and grow faster and can handle the environment better as well. So after finding all these kind of things that we just settle on some strain that we're pretty happy right now growing in our pond. So after finding the strain, we will have to design a system to cultivate and process algae. But here's a flow chart that we make up, giving a bit of explanation for what we are doing now. So our first input on the left-hand corner here, non-potable water. As there's a lot of people wondering, how can we grow a marine species in a place that's 400k away from the nearest beach? So in Gundawindi here, the only water sources that we are available for us to use are bore water, which is undrinkable. So we try to mimic the sea water by adding pool salt into the pond. In that way, we can achieve kind of the ideal salinity level that we want for algae to grow. And after that, we'll have CO2 go into the pond. The algae prefer to go into a certain pH range, and with the grow activity happening in the pond, it will increase the water pH. So we kind of put CO2 in to help to bring down the pH to the optimum level. We are currently using cylinder pack to go to supply the CO2. But then our next thing after we in this season, that will be working on collecting our waste gas from the boiler in the soft-feed facility, cool it down, transfer it over, and then just pump it straight into the pond. Waste CO2 gas from power generation plant, brewery, etc., can be collected and used as for algae growth. Doing so will help to turn the waste product into something workable, offset the CO2 emissions, and also reduce our operational costs greatly. So other than CO2, we also need to put in a bit of nutrient into the pond for the algae. It is just a special formula of NPK and plus a bit of other mineral as well. We're able to source most of the nutrients from the local agriculture supplies. One last thing to go into the pond is just Queensland sunshine. So sunshine is probably the last thing that I should be worried about. We have plenty of them in here all throughout the year, so pretty lucky. When we then develop a harvesting and processing system where we collect the algae and pass it through a superfine filter, we are able to kind of separate the algae completely from the water. And the water, when they finish the harvest, will come out clear of the filtration systems. We'll then pump the water back into the pond and to use it grow more algae. For the whole system, the only water loss we will have is the water evaporation during the summertime in the hotter month. Nothing else. We do not need to continue adding salt into the water either, because we are able to capture the water and reuse the same water to grow the algae. We also have a solar farm on site that will produce enough energy to supply all the machinery equipment in the algae farm. It's also spare a fair bit of power to supply our neighbor Wood's grain facility as well. So to scale up an algae farm from the size of the Pinjarra here to the size of what we're doing in Gundawindi, we kind of need to pay attention to every bit of detail. And then sometimes it requires us to take a very different approach in order to achieve that high efficiency and high quality production. Just try to give you a pretty simple example here. So before we put the water into the pond, we need to clean and scrub the pond liner. So back when I was in Pinjal Hill working with that 30-meter long pond, Sky and I would just use a long broom, as you can see in the first picture here, just to scrub through the whole ponds, and then it would normally take half a day non-stop pushing to finish the cleaning, which wasn't too bad. But it's become a completely different story when you're using the same method to clean a pond that's more than 200 meters long and a lot wider as well. So when we will continue using the same practice to clean the pond here in Gundawindi at the beginning, and then it took us more than half a week just to get one pond done. It was too slow. So eventually one of our contractor, Mick, he came up with a pretty smart idea that we just make up this attachment, attach with a bit of pipe and then the carpet wrap around the pipe. So we just drag along the things around the pond with a bucket. So now we just managed to get that job done with one person in half a day. I'll just give you one simple example here, but then as algae is not something that readily available it's not a fully developed industry. So there's not a lot of machinery available on the market for us to use as well. So in terms of processing and harvesting, a lot of things we have to do it in the same way as how we clean the pond. We have to make up our own solution and just modify with what we have as well. After all these kind of things, there you have it, AgaePharm. So that's the picture of what we are now, but then that's without the algae in it. It's still just clean water, that's why it's not green. And here is the smallest pond that we have in a greenhouse, kind of protected from the outside environment, less contamination in there. We don't use it for production purpose. It's more for inoculation, as Peer shown in the slide. It's part of the scale up process there. And then we have a half size pond in here, and then have the full size pond about 220 meter long. And that's another picture with the algae in the pond. We just kind of have that chart here in wood grain to kind of give you a bit of perspective of how big our pond is. And then also it's kind of saying that it's going to be a nightmare to clean that with the broom half a week. So on talk about keeping things local, we always try our best to keep it local whenever we can when we build and operate a facility. In order to do so, we find that it's best to break up the job down to small pieces and small tasks and try to distribute them to different persons so they can all work on something they're very familiar with. For example, we work with local irrigation company to set up our water transfer harvesting systems, and work with local fabricator to make up paddle wheels and all kind of stuff. So knowledge are transferable, and a lot of experience from knowledge from the traditional agriculture practice can actually be applied on agriculture farming as well. So a bit of things that I do that for all the new contractors coming on site to work for us, I will always try to give them a bit of tool and a bit of explanation how the system work and how algae work. So it just to help them to establish a bit of understanding of the whole system. And oftentimes after they gain a bit of understanding, they will provide some pretty good advice and good feedback. And sometimes something out of the box that we never thought about. Not saying in terms of how they teach us to grow and process algae, but more of using their expertise just help up to make the whole system more efficient, the whole system better that way. For the employment, we currently have 2 full-time employees, plus a team of contractors and cash operator working on this stage. We only have 2 pond now. Our goal is to get to 10 full-size pond in the future. So we'll be expecting for a full team of people, full-time employee working on site very soon. Besides that, also we are continuing engaging with the university and all the education education institutions and provide a place for people to come and learn. Is also kind of good place to showcase a bit of the future of agriculture farming. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I have my contact detail here. So if people is interested in any product that AgaePharm producing, can just shoot us an email. And also, while we talk, I think our AgaePharm website is live now. So www.algaefarm.com. Can go on there. We got some video there. Got some information of our AgaePharm as well. So if people need more information, they can go up there and have a look. So that's it. Thank you. How do I stop this? There you go.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks very much, Kai. That was a really great step-by-step process, and I love your innovative cleaning machine and that you're tapping into local innovation, cleaning that ingenuity.
Just because all the processing and stuff, some of them kind of more involving bit of IPs and stuff, not able to share, but I just bit of example giving the mindset that you have to kind of think it your way through, and then you have to do things kind of differently to start a new industry and start going algae processing algae as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got 7 questions in the Q&A. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
So will we answer Bob Shepherd's first? Is there any GM work being done to improve existing algae strains, and how much potential is there for improvement using GM?
Okay, I can answer that. Yes, so we have a program where we're looking at different genetic elements, how basically it's a reshuffling of genetic elements, how we can improve the productivity, the yields of the algae. And so we do that also with this particular algae Nanocropsis. However, because it's GM, we don't see it to be released into agriculture very quickly. It's basically lab work that's happening in the moment. And yeah, we can basically do some metabolic engineering to increase the yields. And so that's fine. But the regulatory approval is just so complicated and so difficult and expensive that we don't think we're going to see any GM algae in the near future. It's just too hard. There is one way though, and that is basically to use the CRISPR technology. So the CRISPR technology does not introduce new genetic elements to the algae, but instead it just tries to regulate the way oil, for example, is produced. And that one is not considered GM. So there are different ways of doing algae breeding, if you like, and those, I think we will see some of those coming out, but in the moment it's an academic exercise, so we will see whether this is going to be viable. We have also done before some crosses and some evolution experiments, basically trying to breed varieties of algae, different varieties. And yes, we have had some success with that, where we had some algae that were very, very high in oil, but it turned out that they were not competitive. So it's quite easy for an elite variety of algae to lose its trait because the doubling time is such that it can very, very quickly outcompeted by other algae that are less productive. So basically you need to have an algae that grows fast and produces fast a lot at the same time. And so new varieties of algae are very difficult to maintain as they evolve very quickly.
And do farms typically produce species that are local to their area? I mean, like in terms of Australia?
Yeah, that's a very good strategy. So the idea is to already use locally adapted strains. They have been there for millions of years, literally, already. And so they have had a head start in terms of being adapted to the environment. They can cope with the climate. So we only use local strains, but local basically means Southeast Queensland. So that's still a big area. You know, we had a look at in Gondiwindi, for example, at some of the lakes, but we couldn't isolate that particular algae.
Oh, right.
So this algae is sourced a few hundred kilometers away from Gondiwindi, but we could still consider it a local algae that is really well adapted to the climate and therefore competitive. One of the reasons it grows so fast is it's basically a very, it's almost like a weed. You know, it can grow very, very fast, which doesn't mean that there is not going to be issues, such as, you know, you can have predators, for example, or little zooplankton that likes to eat the algae. So that can come as well. Like with any agricultural crop, you would have that too. But we have also found ways how we can manage and control those.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you more about some of those things like disease and being eaten, but we just better get through these questions first.
Sure.
So how many kilograms of algae is produced by volume of water per day?
Well, it depends, of course, but on the season. So in summertime, when it's very, very hot, this algae is not very productive. So around December, January, it's just too hot. Basically, during that time, it's not very productive, but the other times it is. And we get about 15 grams per square meter per day. So we like to look at it as area productivity rather than volume, because, you know, what's limiting for the growth is just the light. And the light is basically, you know, a function of the area. You know, how much light can be there. So you can have the pond deeper if you like, you can have more volume, but you're not going to have more productivity, not more yields. So just by having more volume. So it's about 15 grams dry weight per square meter per day.
Thanks for that question, Alison. Julianne's got two questions. She's got, are there any waste byproducts, such as the effluent, I guess from the filtration system? And what is the maximum proximity the facility should be to the CO2 source?
I don't know, Kai, do you want to have a go at this one? Or?
What's that waste product thing?
Yep.
I guess once you've done the filtration and you've got the water clean,
Yep.
Is there any other waste byproduct from that filtration process?
We have tiny little bit of black thrush, just because that when you're in an open pond, you kind of getting, you know, all the leaves and all the grass going into that. But that's like tiny. We probably, when we do a couple thousand harvests, you probably only get less than a liter of those kind of stuff out. Basically, you're just separating algae and water. That's it.
Okay.
Yep.
And she's asking how close you have to be to the CO2 source, and I guess how do you transport that CO2 source to the farm?
Well, I guess that one is also kind of depend on how you're going to transport it. For what we think we will do for our stockfish facility here, we're just going to light the pipe underground, and then so we're going to collect the gas in the stockfish boiler, and then we'll just transfer it through the pipeline and then bring it back here. But I'm not too sure whether you can bring it on the truck and then transport it. But then that might be adding another operational cost in there as well.
And David's question is related to that. So how challenging is it to separate this CO2 that is the waste output from industrial processes, I guess, other things being in the flue gas, I guess, from a boiler and those sorts of things?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And we were also interested in this. So basically it does come down to what else is in the flue gas. The CO2 is great. But if there are things in there that make your life difficult, it's very difficult to grow the algae. For example, if we are looking at a coal-fired power plant, this is the most challenging one, because in the coal-fired power plant, in the flue gas, you also have sulfur dioxide. Yep. So the moment you add sulfur dioxide to water, it becomes very, very acidic. It becomes sulfuric acid. Right? So if you just add the flue gas to the water, it becomes sulfuric acid, which of course is not going to be very favorable for algae growth. So we've shown that you can do it, but then you need to buffer the algae water so that the pH doesn't change too much. So it is possible, but they don't grow under optimal conditions. There are some other nasties in flue gas from coal, for example, heavy metals and also dust. And so, the dust can be removed in a filter, but the heavy metals still get through as well. So it just depends on the batch of coal that's being burned. So coal is probably the most challenging flue gas. However, if we look at the other flue gases that are available where there's large amounts of CO2, from a gas power plant, this is fantastic because natural gas, when you burn it, methane, it will just produce CO2 and water. That's it. So it's a very, very clean flue gas coming from gas power plants. You know, it's CO2, of course, it's polluting, but it's actually the resource that we need to grow more algae. So it'd be fantastic to do that. Another really good source is from anaerobic digestion, which is often done in agriculture. So for all sorts of different, you know, I have a friend who's got a piggery, for example. He has an anaerobic digester. There's a big chicken farm that has an anaerobic digester. Basically, anaerobic digesters are quite widely used. Now, anaerobic digesters will produce biogas, which is great. That can be burnt and it will generate heat and electricity. The biogas itself is not just methane, it's not just the combustible gas, but half of it is already CO2. So you're looking at a mixture of methane and CO2 coming from biogas. And when it's combusted, it's just becomes CO2 and water. So again, it's a very fantastic, good source of CO2 if we can use the biogas once it's combusted.
Yeah, so it's a lovely example of circular economy.
Yeah, it's fantastic, especially for carbon, you know, decarbonization and reducing the carbon footprint. It's fantastic.
So Bob Shepherd's got a question here. Is there a significant investment at the Pinjarra Hills site? Is the site above the Brisbane River flood zone? Question.
Okay, well, it depends on which flood you're talking about. Is the ones 2011? It's not. It would have completely covered it. It would have, you know, basically inundated it. So no, it's close to the river. We haven't had any issues since. I mean, it's still about 10 meters higher than the actual normal river. But the flood that we have in 2011 was exceptional. But we believe that it's not going to be an issue in the future. Hopefully the river will be managed in a better way in the future and we will not have that issue. If we did have that issue, I mean, it's an experimental site and there was a lot of investment, of course. We are using this not just for production, we are using part of it for production with another company, with Cuponics, but we are mainly using this for research purposes. So this means whenever we would like to develop a new process that we need to test at large scale, this is where we do it. And so basically anything from, in the moment we're working very hard on oil extraction. And that needs to be scaled up, it needs to be safe, it needs to be cheap, and it needs to be environmentally friendly. So all of these boxes need to be ticked. And so this is a nice playground for us to try things at large scale. And yeah, of course there are some risks from river flooding, but we sometimes also get a lot of rain. And we also, the whole site in fact had to be bunded. So if we did have a huge downpour, none of the algae can escape into the river because of their nutrient load.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I suppose there hasn't been much rain out at Goondiwindi for a while, Kai.
Oh, it's actually, we actually get some rain last couple of weeks ago, but then
that's good.
It was pretty good. Yeah. It was.
So Paul Groves has just asked, is there any issues with contamination with other species in the outdoor ponds? I guess other species thinking it's a good place to live as well. So weeds almost.
Yeah. Look, there definitely is with any commercial crop, you know, with anything that you grow monoculture on large scale, there always is issues with contamination with other species. It's just like you have weeds in a wheat field, or you know, you have insects attacking, or pathogens attacking. All these kind of things can also happen. It's just a crop like any other crop. However, it's something that we're learning how to control these.
Yep.
And we are very lucky that nanocrops is one of the fastest growing algae in the world. So it does outcompete almost anything else. Probably it does outcompete anything else as long as the conditions are optimal. So it's just when the conditions are not optimal, for example, when it becomes too hot, that the algae slow down a bit. And that can then be an issue when you have, maybe some other algae can take over that are more heat tolerant. And so you just need to manage that process. And maybe during those 2 summer months, switch to a different algae species that is more heat tolerant.
Yeah.
With what Peer said, yeah, it's actually just a process of learnings and just get to know the algae well, and then get to know how algae handle the local environment as well. We actually just a couple of weeks ago, we just have a contamination in one of our ponds with another species diatom going there. But then just with managing providing ideal conditions for nano to grow, we actually don't have to do anything to kill off the diatom. The nano just outgrow, then eventually just the diatom's gone, just like that. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting stuff. Yeah,
great strategy.
Different way to do it. There's a lot of different way to do it, but then yeah, definitely all the experience and will help.
Thank you. Amanda's asked, will this work near an abattoir in Mackay?
So probably, Amanda, you're thinking about the wastewater coming from the abattoir and whether that wastewater can be used. So yes, we're already collaborating with another abattoir in Bow Desert, and we've been using the wastewater and see what we can grow in it. So it can be done. You need to dilute it a bit. Sometimes the nutrient load is a bit too high or it's too cloudy. The algae in the end still need light. So we need to basically look exactly at the wastewater and see whether it's usable. We need to have a profile of the water as well. You know, if there are any nasties in there, we also need to think about pathogens. We need to think about chemicals or pesticides that may be in there, or hormones. You know, all these kind of things, heavy metals, need to be taken into consideration, and whether any of these would transfer into the algae. And then it's a matter of what you do with the algae. I think it would be not very well regarded if you use the wastewater from an abattoir to grow edible algae for human consumption. So that is just a psychological hurdle, and also needs to be checked whether it's safe. However, it's a little bit easier if you grow algae for animal feed, or if you grow algae for biofuel. So, for example, one could envisage a situation where the wastewater from Mackay may be used to grow algae for fuel, let's say biodiesel. So that would make Australia a little bit less dependent on fuel imports. And then the remaining biomass could be used as feed. So, or maybe it could be further refined, and we get a more refined protein from it. So it just depends on the conditions of the water. But in general terms, nearly all wastewater can be used. It even can be used in mining wastewater, but mining wastewater is a different story again, because often that's contaminated with heavy metals. And some algae are able to accumulate the heavy metals. So then the algae themselves become toxic waste, right? Because they are full of heavy metals, but you have clean water. So then the water is the product, and the algae are the waste.
So is that the first step, Pierre, if you happen to be in that what you call that Goldilocks zone, that if they were interested, that they would send you water samples?
Yes, please. Amanda, if you want to send us some water samples, or just give me a call or email, please just do that. If you can't find my email, maybe you can Google my name, you'll find the contact details.
Great, thank you. Jamie asks, how big a farm needs to be in order to be commercially successful? For instance, for the production of energy biogas. I'm thinking in the context of an isolated community that relies on diesel generators to produce energy for the community. Thanks. Interesting question.
So I'm becoming more and more interested in the biofuel. In fact, it's still the master plan for all of this. The idea is to first build up the industry so we can learn from the learning curve, that we can make it cheaper and cheaper. But if you produce biodiesel close to Brisbane, for example, you probably only get about $1 a litre. I know in remote communities, the price of fuel is much higher, because you're also looking at freight charges. So under those circumstances, in an isolated community, there's a few reasons why you would like to produce fuel yourself. One is it's already very expensive, so you could probably compete with the cost as you produce it yourself. And also it makes the community much less dependent, right? So it's a very good feeling if you can produce your own energy, your own fuel. It's also a bit of a national security, especially in the moment We're hearing that Scott Morrison is talking about Australian sovereignty so that we become less dependent on imports. So that means we have to learn how to manufacture again and become more self-sufficient. So so it's a bit more than just economic considerations there. However, it is possible, as I mentioned before, to get an example that a higher value product can be co-produced. For example, if biofuel is produced and biogas, which is what I propose there, if you get surplus nutrients, let's say from a piggery, you will also have surplus nutrients coming out of the system in the form of either fertilizer or possibly protein-rich biomass, which could be used as feed. So there's more than one income stream. And yeah, there's the possibility just have an energy farm where you're only extracting biodiesel and biogas, and the input is just coming from the sun. But if it needs to be economically more viable, there's the option to maybe use some nutrients from another industry, or to, the cost of fertilizer in the moment is not very high. So it's possible to keep adding nutrients and then also extract the protein as well at the same time. So it just depends on the situation. I'd like to have a chat with Jamie. She has some particular isolated community in mind. It'd be nice to talk to Jamie. Yeah.
Fascinating. Sorry, there's getting more questions added at the bottom. Are you okay, Peer and Kai, to just answer? I think we've got 4 more. Yep.
Right.
So what percentage water loss do you experience from evaporation? Have you ever thought about using closed systems?
For us, during the summer, during the hotter months, we kind of calculated that average we will experience about 20 to 30 cubic meter of water loss, all 3 ponds add up. So that's about probably 2,000 to 20,000 to 30,000 liter of water per day. But that's all 3 ponds add up. And then that's only when it's super hot and then super dry, then you have that much evaporation. We don't have that problem all year round, just the 1 or 2 months when it's really hot in the summer. Closed system, I think that's a bit of awkward place to be in. Of algae, you kind of want the airflow to kind of cool them down as well, and then you want that UV from the sun to go in. You don't really want a system that's fully closed, and it will get too hot. It will heat up the algae. And even just another question that with his question saying that shaded options. So after the question that Helen mentions, is the same thing as well. When you come down to building something that 200 plus meter long and then 20 something meter wide for each pond, and then if you're gonna have shaded system for the whole 10 ponds, it's gonna be a very expensive cost add-on to building that, and then in that way it might just too much a cost to. Then we can't sell the algae to the price that cover the operations. That's another thing.
So having said that, though, we are trying this, and we're trying to use shade cloths to partially shade the algae during the hot summer months to see whether we can achieve, we can continue our growth during the hot summer months. And so we don't know yet. So this is a good suggestion. Shade cloth is not that expensive, so maybe that could be managed. We just see whether partial shading might actually do a trick. We can at least extend the season, so we don't have to interrupt it for such a long time in the summer.
Okay.
That's great.
So the next question is, if you were to use potable water and hospital grade CO2, how would that affect production outputs both in volume and quality? So very clean water, and I'm assuming clean CO2.
I mean, one of the virtues of algae is that they can clean water, so we don't need clean water.
Yeah.
You will have to add mineral in the potable water to make it nutrient rich anyway, and then I don't really see a point of using hospital grade CO2. It's nothing. The one we're using now is food grade, and you can use something from the bottle. I don't think there's as long as it's not introducing heavy metals and all the stuff in there, I don't see a point other than just increasing the operational cost.
Yeah, probably not a good business case. So Allison's asked, is Queensland looking to create an export market level of production?
We are, yeah, for sure. Like, as far as I know, our company, and then there's, as Peer mentioned, there's a lot of company coming up, and we're definitely not only targeting domestic market, definitely, especially.
So, sorry, Kai.
Yeah, you are.
Oh, I was just wondering, are there food processing companies that can process the algae, or is that another developing area?
Really depend on how you're going to use that algae as. If you're going to use it as powder, which is fairly easy, you just harvest it and dry them. But if you're going to use them as an algae oil, then we're going to go down further just to extracting the oil. So it just really depend on what kind of thing. It comes down to what kind of thing the market wants.
Yeah.
And then what stage that you're gonna process the algae to as well.
So the next question from Alison I can maybe answer. So how much CO2 is required to produce 1 ton of algae? So this is a pretty easy one. So basically you need almost 2 tons of CO2 to produce 1 ton of algae.
That's
and that
dry
is because
algae.
Dry algae, yes, 1 ton of dry algae, right?
Yeah.
And that is because about 50% of the dry algae is carbon, so the elemental carbon. But if you look at the molecule CO2, it's got 1 carbon, but also 2 oxygens. Those 2 oxygens are produced during photosynthesis and released to the atmosphere, and it's only the carbon itself that's managed. So only about 1/3 of the CO2 is being used as it assimilates the CO2. So yeah, you need about 2 tons of CO2 to produce 1 ton of algae, a little bit less.
And can farms claim credits for that?
Good question. Maybe it depends where the CO2 comes from, right? So
yeah.
If it reduces the emissions, I mean, you are in fact not really. If you produce biofuel, okay, you are reducing emissions somewhere else because fuel is not being combusted and burnt, right? Therefore, fossil fuel does not release as much carbon. However, this is carbon dioxide that has already been fixed from the atmosphere, and then you release it again to the atmosphere. So, for example, the algae, it's basically carbon neutral at best.
Yeah.
If you're looking at carbon sequestration, you would have to bury parts of the algae underground. So there's also that scenario. We can also do that. We can even capture some CO2 as you use biofuel. And if you did that, you would even be able to, if you use biofuel and you capture some of the CO2 emissions from biofuel, you could then bury that underground as biochar. And then that would be a net reduction in CO2 in the atmosphere. So it's a carbon sequestration strategy. Technology is there, it's just a matter of whether the incentives are there and we are prepared to pay the real cost of the climate change that we are experiencing at the moment.
Yeah. And well, the next question is, has biodiesel been tested by a fuel company at this stage?
Our biodiesel, no, we haven't produced enough that it could be tested. But in the US, this has been tested and it's been used by the Navy, US Navy as well. It's also been used, although jet fuel has been used also by Virgin, for example, Virgin Australia, even Qantas. So there's been fuel. Yeah, so jet fuel can also be produced from algae oil. It's not really a problem. So technically it's all fine. It just comes down to the cost question. You know, can we produce it cheaply enough? Because it is very, very cheap in the moment to just get fuel out of the fossil fuel. Yeah, we're not paying the real cost of the fossil fuel as we buy.
Absolutely. And last question. Thank you everybody for hanging in there. Could you farm algae in an existing facility like a prawn farm and get CO2 maybe delivered from a local sugar mill?
Okay, so just the sugar mill. Unfortunately, sugar mills, when they burn the bagasse, you can see it's quite a big smoke cloud, right? And it's not clean CO2. We haven't tried this, but I would think that it's going to be very challenging to use that flue gas from a local sugar mill to grow algae. Now, to convert a prawn farm It depends a little bit how the prawn farm is set up. You've seen we have some raceway ponds in the commercial algae farm, which are only between 20 and 30 centimeters deep. So prawn farms, my understanding is that are a bit deeper and they have oxygenation. So you're dealing with more volume per area, which means you have to process more water, which would mean that it's a bit more work, but it could still be done. So rather than circulating the algae in a raceway pond, you could have local bubbling, and you could also have production in a prawn farm setting and grow algae in there as well.
It's an interesting idea. All right. So sorry, I'll just share my screen again.
Just last question. I just quickly answer this. So birds, whether birds is a problem, right?
I was saying the birds.
Yes.
Control to go.
So whether birds is a problem. This is the last question.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know. Should I have a go, or do you want to talk about it, Kai?
Well, you can talk first and then add a bit of input in.
So birds are always there. I mean, they're basically attracted to the water. They come and are interested, and they will also bring contamination in. You can think sometimes maybe they will do a little something, and then that could bring in bacteria. So bacteria are always a reality as well. However, when we harvest, we have the option to clean the algae by rinsing with extra water. And then also once the algae are harvested, they can be pasteurized. So you are, first of all, washing the algae, and then you can pasteurize them to make sure that any microbial contaminants are not going to be an issue. But it's basically like any open outdoor cultivation. If you grow lettuce, you know, it's the same. It's not going to be free of birds. My friend is a strawberry farmer. He constantly complains about the birds picking into the strawberries. And it's a matter of good manufacturing practice.
Yeah. We got birds and ducks going to the pond. It's just something you can't really control, but then it's all come down to how you process the algae after you harvest them.
Okay. You can't blame the birds, I guess.
No, it's the water.
All right. I'm just going to go back to my presentation.
Thanks.
So, I really want to thank you, Peer and Kai. It's been a really inspirational and interesting presentation today. And I feel like we've just scratched the surface, and that we'll be hearing a lot more about algae in the future. I did want to quickly mention our upcoming webinar next week. So we've got Grant Binning. So Regional Queensland's really well positioned to take advantage of some innovative national and international supply chains. So Grant's worked in this space for about 30 years. And so he's going to share his knowledge about how Queenslanders can really work together to benefit from these supply chains, and also discuss some high value products and whether it's worth branching into those with these new emerging supply chains. So that'll be fascinating. So please register for that. And also we'll be sending you a copy of presentation today. So thanks.
I saw that Sarah.
Another question.
Yeah.
Sarah.
Oh.
You go to the chat. Sarah is actually having a question.
Yes, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Who wants to have a go? So it's about vertical farms, right? If we are short of space, could we make vertical farms? So yes, of course we could. Yeah. But in the end, it comes down to the limiting factor in our case is the light. So we're not going to have more light in a vertical farm, right? We could have some LED technology, but then that means the electricity has to be produced somewhere. So the only way to have vertical farms is to have more light coming in. So it can be done, of course. You can also think about urban settings where maybe people would like to grow some on the roof, and you can also use bioreactors. There's quite a lot of technology available where people are already doing vertical farming with bioreactors, algae bioreactors. Some of them are 10, 20 meters high. So
mixing going to be a problem as well when you get vertical farm, and you're going to aim for large scale productions because you find a way to mix that much algae up and down.
All right,
you can do it. It's doable, definitely doable.
I feel like we could talk all day. Anyway, we better tie it up. Thanks once again, Peer and Kai, and thanks also everybody for listening and hanging in there for an hour and a half nearly. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.